Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I know that we got started a little bit late, but I have been promised we still have the allotted time that we've been promised, so we're going to be here for our 50 minutes, okay? My name is Andrew Davila. I serve as the Senior Business Engagement Manager for Charlotte-Works. Charlotte-Works is the Workforce Development Board for Mecklenburg County, and it is my privilege to introduce today's panelists. First, we have Eric Ortega. Gonna introduce him like Vanna does. Eric Ortega serves as the Senior Social Service Manager, Unified Workforce Development, Department of Community Resources, Mecklenburg County. Eric brings 20 years of programming expertise and will serve as today's moderator. He is also a member of the Summit Planning Committee. Next, we have Patrice Funderburg. Using over 20 years of corporate human resource experience to advance criminal justice systems change as the Executive Director at the Center for Community Transitions, otherwise known as CCT. A 2022 recipient of the Bank of America Neighborhood Builder Award, CCT is a Charlotte-based nonprofit organization that creates re-entry pathways for the justice-involved population in 3 ways: employment and training, social emotional wellness, and supporting alternatives to incarceration. Next in our lineup is Henry Rock. Little wave there of the hand from Henry, thank you. Henry Rock of City Startup Labs is the founder and executive director. Henry Rock has well over 2 decades of experience in media sales, advertising, and marketing, working on national brands in Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia for Johnson Publishing, the National Black Network, Black Media Inc., and other black media companies. Next up we have is Sonia Harper. Sonia, quick little wave. There we go. Sonia is the director of Mecklenburg County's Criminal Justice Service Department. In her position, she is responsible for the oversight of the community's pretrial services, recovery courts, reentry services, forensics evaluations unit, and criminal justice research and planning. And at the far left, Chablis Dandridge. I had a little problem pronouncing his name, but I got it right, correct? All right, Chablis. He is a real estate professional specializing in providing transitional housing for those reentering society from incarceration and those facing chronic homelessness. Alongside his real estate work, he is a senior North Carolina certified peer support specialist with an accreditation in forensic peer support and formal training as a forensic peer support facilitator. So quick round of applause for our panelists today.
All right, thank you, Andrew. And this is Andrew Davila with Charlotte-Works. So give him a round of applause for being our facilitator. Today is my honor to be the moderator for this specific panel, breakout panel, because of the importance of looking at untapped talent. So I'm gonna pose this question to the facilitator, to panelists. What are the benefits of hiring, developing, and retaining this audience of untapped talent? Who would like to go first?
Well, I'll start. Good morning. Thank you, Eric and Andrew. So the importance of tapping into justice-involved individuals is basically, and bottom line, we spend about $80 billion a year on incarceration. And so we all have a benefit when we put people back to work and we don't put people in carceral facilities. They add to the tax revenue. They also become consumers, and they're part of our community ecosystem. There are so many people, speaking as a person with lived experience, who are languishing in prisons and jails and have huge potential and talent. I've watched it. I did 13 years in prison, and I saw over those years so many very talented people and gifted people just sit for years and years and years. most of the time in the most productive years of their life without opportunity. So I'll pause there.
I'll pick that up. Thank you for that, Chablis, and thank you, Eric and Andrew and all of you. At CCT, well, let me say it this way. There's research that shows that people with records have about 13% greater retention outcomes in employment. 81% of HR professionals, according to the Society for HR Management Foundation, would hire a person with records. And somewhere in between that retention statistic and that percentage of HR professionals who would hire a person with records is a gap that's rooted in bias and fear and lots of things that there are narratives around people with justice involvement that, for any of you who are HR folks, really limit you from hiring untapped talent. And so for me, coming from the HR sector particularly, I look at it from an HR business process standpoint and the value of reducing turnover costs to bring folks who have higher retention rates hits a bottom line, somebody's bottom line, even if you don't see it. And so I think beginning the conversation of the business case and the benefits of hiring people with records from an HR standpoint starts with HR business process, retention outcomes, and lowering turnover costs and increasing higher engagement scores. I'll also say at the Center for Community Transitions, one of our programs is a Center for Women, which is a work release program pre-release for currently incarcerated women. The ladies at the house, where my office is located, receive jobs that are typically less than half of living wage, and they have greater retention outcomes. As my job and my vision, in partnership with community, and I work with everyone here on the panel, the benefits of creating pathways of opportunity for not just the ladies that are releasing from our program, but for anyone with justice involvement, to put them on pathways to living and above living wage jobs that contribute, to Chablis' point, to tax revenue and also greater economic mobility outcomes in our community.
So I think, in addition to, to both what Patrice and Chablis have talked about, I think, the other thing about, work and hiring folks is when you look at a lot of like the data and research out there, I mean, there are very close correlations between criminal activity and socioeconomics. And so, in addition, to, again, wanting to invest in folks that are incarcerated, people that are returning to our community, there's also a public safety aspect where work ties into that. So when we look at, across the spectrum of services that we provide at CJS, and reentry is, was one of our services, what we notice is that whenever folks are working and they have secure, places to live, when they have stability, that group of folks has some of the lowest recidivism rates that we see, and that's regardless of what touch point they are within the system. Because at CJS, we're working with folks on the front end at pretrial, we're working with folks that are on probation through our recovery courts, and then also with reentry, we're working with those folks that are returning to our communities from prison and jail. And again, when folks are able to, to have employment and be able to provide, those basic things that they need, they're less likely to engage in criminal activity again. So I think, there's definitely the importance there. I think, the other thing is the reality of it is that, most folks who are going into facilities, into incarceration, they eventually get out. 95% of the folks that go into prisons are released. And so, again, we want, safe communities. We want to have folks to be, productive members of our society and our communities. And in order to do that, it's important, that folks have, they have places of employment. They have, ways to be able to provide and support, themselves and their families. And so, yeah, I think that, there's definitely lots of different ways, but there is a public safety element to it as well.
Good morning. Good morning. Yeah, I want us to really think about folks that are who've been justice impacted, much like we think about anybody else who are considering hiring, developing. I don't really see, and this is a conversation that I have often with some staff members about the difference between folks that are coming home from incarceration and those who are already in society. All right, so there's trauma that's experienced by, obviously, by folks that have been incarcerated, but there's trauma that's been experienced by folks that haven't been, right? And the folks that are being hired, who have been justice involved, are, in many cases, their aspirations in terms of career, in terms of professional development, in terms of their work ethic, and so forth, are really no different than anybody else in society. So I want us to really kind of think about this population, if you will, much in the same way that we would think about anyone else that we are looking to hire, right? Yes, there are challenges that are all too prevalent and that we're familiar with, that this population experiences upon reentry. But I think that when we're talking about what are the intrinsic things about why one would want to hire an employee, those very same aptitudes and intentions and capabilities, they're there with this population just as they are with anybody else that we would be looking to hire.
All right, thank you for that. And I'm sure we could stay on that topic for the whole breakout session, but we won't. We'll ask the next question. So we talked about the potential of the untapped talent of justice-involved individuals. What I want to get into now are what do you see as some of the barriers, both internally, intrinsic and extrinsic, for hiring individuals who are justice involved? What are the alternatives to hiring, and what are some of the opportunities? Oh, okay.
So, I mean, I'll start with this one. I think, there's definitely, when you're looking at challenges and barriers, I think, a lot of those are actually, they're policy driven. There is a lot of flexibility and capabilities to really kind of change rules. And so, for folks that are, they're coming out of incarceration and seeking employment, a lot of the places where they run into challenges with securing employment is the fact that there is a policy or a rule in place that prevents, a company or an organization from hiring. Now, you've seen some shift over the last, several years away from that. So you've seen, more of, more organizations becoming second chance employers. You're seeing more organizations moving towards like the ban the box. So, you're not asking that question up front as to whether or not a person has a criminal history, which allows them to advance further into the process based on, their skill level. But I will say at the same time, one of the interesting things that we've seen sort of post-pandemic is we have seen some shift in a lot of organizations and companies away from some of those policies, and that's really been driven by staffing shortages. And so that has been something over the last couple of years that, again, we have found to be very interesting. And I would say at CJS, we have experienced a lot more employers, private organizations that reach out and we're like, hey, we're looking for staff. Do you guys have folks that you can refer to us? And we're always a little shocked. We're like, well, you guys ever wanted to work with our people before? Because we're always reaching out, to find, places to kind of help get our folks connected with. But that has been something that we've seen, have seen a shift, and again, it's been driven by the staffing shortages brought on by the pandemic. So I would say that's kind of one of the things that is a little different now is that, we've always invested heavily in, assisting with recruitment, with workforce readiness, with getting people prepared to enter the workforce. We do a lot of work with Patrice and her group there, with our folks that are reentering in that space. But where we have really had to shift over the last couple of years is focusing a lot more on retention, workforce, employment retention. Because now it's a lot easier for folks to get a job. There are still challenges. I am not minimizing that at all. There's still a lot of challenges for folks, to be able to get a job, but there are more opportunities to do that. And so, there is, I don't want to say there's not a need, but there are folks that are more kind of willing to sort of bypass sort of that work development or the initial kind of preparedness to get into the workforce. So we're focusing now, folks are able to get a job a little bit more easier, more quickly. So we're spending more resources and more time on working with folks on now you've got the job. What are the things that you got to have in place to make sure you keep that job? And so that right there is where we've really been, really kind of directing more resources here over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to look at kind of both sides of the ledger, right? So we have a program called Restorative Pathways, and it's a reentry workplace readiness program. Reentry workplace readiness includes both the employer, right? Because there are, you know, when we think in terms of what some of the barriers may be, many of those barriers are internal, which can be adjusted and changed and modified a lot easier than the external barriers, which, you know, as Sonia mentioned, you know, could be about licensure or being able to have you know, credentials that or compliance issues, right? And many of those are policy driven, as was mentioned. But if we focus on the employer side of the ledger, where we can really affect change, then I think that we have a pathway for more employers to really be able to break down those barriers that are internal. And on the other side of the ledger, now we're talking about what does it take to develop that employee. And you know, some of the you know, the challenges that you know, that we see with restorative pathways really have to do with making sure that employees are prepared for dynamic workplaces, right? Because just having a job, you know, that is oftentimes, you know, not family sustainable, family income sustainable, is you know, can lead to this kind of retention challenge that we're experiencing. But if folks are prepared for dynamic workplaces, then they, you know, irrespective of the industry that they're in, irrespective of the employer that they're working with, they're better able to advance their career. They're better able to find opportunities that can give them family-sustaining wages and put them on the right track for future growth and development.
Yes, to all of that. As I think about policy and practice, particularly here in North Carolina, the Second Chance Act was passed a few years ago that opened some of these pathways. We also, in 2019, passed occupational licensing. About a third of jobs in the state of North Carolina require some sort of credential. And for people with records in this space, we call that collateral consequences. If I, not today, thanks to occupational licensing policy change, if I wanted to become a barber or a beautician, or if I wanted to go into a particular industry, occupational licensing laws would be a barrier for someone with a record. So on the employee side, those barriers are removed, and most employers don't know about occupational licensing policy change in the state of North Carolina. Employers are looking for the staffing agency model oftentimes. I have open roles. I need different talent pools. This is a talent pool that is being promoted. 70 million Americans have some sort of justice involvement. 1 in 3 people have justice involvement. All of the stats that, if you pay attention to second chance or fair chance employment, you're familiar with these stats. However, the work that we do isn't necessarily staffing agency. To Sonia and Henry's point, it really is about preparing the individual to survive the business environment, right? That scarlet F, or justice involvement, is often rooted in things that have nothing to do with skill building, right? It's rooted in, you committed a crime, what if you do that at work, right? And depending on the nature of the crime, from an HR standpoint and from a business standpoint, this is gonna hurt my brand, this is gonna hurt my bottom line, I'm gonna get canceled, all these other things. So the individual, the person with that lived expertise, is navigating that mentally, emotionally, and also outwardly physical, because they are the person that holds that record. it doesn't always equate to what the data is showing on retention outcomes, higher engagement scores, higher productivity, and the desire by HR professionals to give an opportunity to folks, right? So this policy and practice, both on the employer and the employee side, really for us, or I would say for us at Center for Community Transitions, our program called LifeWorks, and I brought some brochures here, our LifeWorks program really centers on not necessarily rebuilding, depending on the nature of the person's justice involvement, but helping that individual root themselves in self-determination, right? The skill building is absolutely necessary, the job skill building. Employers want job-ready candidates. That's vocational programs, that's the skill building on completing the application, navigating the interview and selection process and those sorts of things. However, that individual is walking into a business environment where they want to grow their careers, just like to Henry's point, treat these folks like any other employee that you're hiring, and the emphasis on reducing that level of bias that we have really rooted in fear, y'all. It really is rooted in fear. We have to acknowledge that out loud, and that is the barrier that can open up a pathway for folks that have records to be successful, to live into these retention outcomes and engagement score outcomes and productivity outcomes. It doesn't mean that employers are not doing that. So on the employer side, I would say, from my experience, both as an HR person and now working on the nonprofit side, employers are very passively engaged, right? Surprisingly, employers in Charlotte, more than we know publicly, are actually engaged in second chance employment. That presents a challenge for some of our programs because if you've been in Charlotte for a while, you know someone else does it first, then I'll jump in, right? And so there are lots of folks that are, in fact, the employer that Henry's team works with is a major employer in Charlotte that is doing second chance employment and doing it well. We, in our LifeWorks program, as participants graduate from our program, they can go to Henry's program. We receive candidates from Mecklenburg Reentry Services through Sonia's program, and employers are reaching out to us, and they sometimes open an opportunity for us to have a different kind of conversation than the staffing agency conversation. This is about retention. This is about business process. So the barriers from policy to practice, and practice being employer practices, what do we need to get you to not be a passive employer in second chance employment? How can we move you from ban the box to actually hiring and retaining folks, right? This is all HR business process. How do we reduce your cost per hire or time to fill metrics with this particular population? Correspondingly, on the applicant side or the employee side, how do we grow your self-determination and your motivation so that you are inspired to proceed through this pathway and obtain not only a living wage job, but a career path, right? That's the opportunity that I think we consistently have in Charlotte.
I would speak to just the opportunity here, and everything that everybody said, I echo the sentiment. One of the opportunities that I think we have is both on the employer side and on the job seeker side is an opportunity to educate. So we educate employers about the importance, about the significance, and about the potential. But we also, at the same time, because I also work in the carceral facility, I work in the detention center, and we provide life skills training and employment readiness and financial literacy training and all of these things. It's the soft skills, the confidence, and also as a forensic peer support, the coaching. So having somebody there that can coach a person through a potential job crisis is important. And also modeling behavior that a person can see, hey, this person did this time, and he's also out here doing productive things, and he's making a contribution, and the workforce, the community values him. Maybe I can be that person as well. So one of the things about peer support is just dealing the hope of possibility. So we are the hope dealers and the bridges to the resources. So there's I'm familiar with, and I'll be brief with this. I'm familiar with one of the gentlemen who graduated Henry's program and got a job with the big employer, and he took advantage of every program that was out there. He went to transitional housing, he went to City Startup Labs program, he got a car through Wheels for Hope. He eventually, in 9 months, left the transitional house and got his own rental. And barring one incident, he would have been a homeowner right now if he had a just went one other direction. So the possibilities are endless when people have access, and they also have receptive employers, and employers who will take time with them to say, okay, he may need a little more. Let's get with his support network, because they have them. We are it, the support network, and let's plug him back into where any deficiency lies. And then eventually all of those holes and gaps get filled up, and this person is an absolutely phenomenal individual.
There we go. Thank you for that. That's a great question. Great answer. Yes, you will have a time. You had to, all the HR people. You will have time for Q&A in a minute. We're going to skip the next question because I believe you answered that. One of the things I'd like to share is one of the untapped opportunities for employers is the federal bonding program that exists since 1968 but goes underutilized in the state of North Carolina, because to this day employers don't understand that they could actually, if there's a liability concern, they can access the federal bonding program that would cover individuals, right? And the other opportunity, of course, is the workforce opportunity tax credit that allows individuals to be credited for companies towards tax breaks. But we could talk about that later. So what I've heard today is about the untapped potential, and there was a focus and emphasis on job retention and soft skills. I know there's a soft skills that exist today in regards to working smart that's implemented in a lot of programs that we talked about today. What I'd like to talk about now is, in going with that theme, what are some of the what support is needed for justice-involved job seekers? What support do they need beyond the soft skills to be successful on the job, and what are some of the key best practices that you see? Oh, that's a good question. Everybody wants to grab for the mic.
First to the mic, right? So I'm going to give you a quote from Alvin Toffler. Alvin Toffler was a futurist, wrote a book called Future Shock, also wrote a book called Power Shift. And I love this quote of his. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn, right? And so when we think in terms of, what kind of support, we ought to be giving our job seekers, it really, we've talked about the soft skills. Well, let's really kind of rethink that and think about cognitive skills, right? What are the and by the way, just heard a piece on Marketplace yesterday that there was a report from the Fed, one of the regional feds, where the director of that Fed said, we are not going to be filling unfilled jobs any longer, right? And in part, it's because of technological advances. AI was noted in this piece because a retailer just let go of 150 folks that were working in a call center, right? Because they are now using AI as a tool to deal with what were formerly call center jobs, right? So AI is coming to get a lot of us, all right? And we just have to be really clear about that. Technology is going to sort of supersede many of the jobs that folks who, particularly folks who have been justice impacted, the kinds of jobs that they are typically routed to, right? And or available for. So I really think that this notion of learning and relearning and unlearning is particularly important. So cognitive skills, while AI may be positioned as something that's cognitive, it really can't replace the cognitive skills that we as human beings have, right? At the end of the day. I also think that interpersonal skills development is important, as well as personal leadership, right? And then layer on top of that the importance of digital and technology skills, right? We really need to position folks for the jobs of the 21st century. We often talk about the future of work, right? But it's also the present of work. This is what we're experiencing now. So I think that when we're looking at how do we support, this population, we really need to be supporting them, as I said at the very beginning, much like we're supporting any hires, right? Any new employees need to be skilled up, trained up in a way to be able to take advantage of, the trend lines that we're seeing in industries and the impact that technology is going to have on, all of our jobs, right? Because it's coming for all of our gigs. So we need to really kind of do some future thinking, as Alvin Toffler would say.
Henry, we
Thank you.
have a session later on, a breakout session that's going to talk about AI as well. So about how they're coming for our jobs.
I love that Henry set it off with sort of a systems look at what is happening in workforce and talent. And I always think about it from, if I was still in corporate HR, how would I be thinking about this? And so without sort of reiterating what Henry said, yes to all of that. And I would add the HR lean. Think about, how many people are HR folks in here? Okay. So think about competency-based interviewing, performance-based interviewing of days past, and how we look at particular competencies that are associated with a job function, that are associated with the skills and the deliverables for that particular job function. Most of that has not changed, yes? A lot of it is now rooted in technology, to Henry's point. Now that I'm in a nonprofit sector and working in our LifeWorks program, or working with our LifeWorks program, the other side of that equation is the true people component, right? Glenn Martin, who is the founder of Just Leadership USA, a directly impacted person who created this organization in the early 2000s upon his release in New York, it's a professional leadership development program for people with records. And what Glenn said was the people closest to the problem are closest to the solutions, but furthest from the access and the resources to activate and execute those solutions. And that is still the case today. So while we need to be paying attention to particularly business leaders, hiring managers, and HR folks that support them on the business side, particularly around the way that technology is taking over our onboarding processes and our talent mobility processes, it changes the way that we think about talent reviews, right? The justice-involved person, once hired, is in that talent review pool just like everyone else. You, as the HR person, might just happen to know that that person has a record. No differently than if a person who is differently abled, you just happen to know that that person is differently abled. So that's the system side. How is the organization being assessed, right? We look at our organizational assessment. How are our onboarding processes? How are our job descriptions written? And how is the technology supporting that? How are we eliminating bias in the technology for the person that has the criminal background check, right? So SHRM, for those of you that are SHRM credentialed, has a program that CCT has been partnering with for about 6 years now called Getting Talent Back to Work, gettingtalentbacktowork.org. For those of you that love the PHR, SPHR, GPHR credentials, Getting Talent Back to Work has a free, what is it, Paul, 10 or 12 hour credential on hiring folks with records. And it goes through a very specific process. That is an offering on the employer side that we have been coaching and counseling employers on the HR business process. Now, for folks that enter into our LifeWorks program, and this is anyone with justice involvement, right? Getting back to that self-determination, They're the person on the ground living that experience. How am I going to navigate this competency-based or this performance-based interview when I've been behind a wall for a couple of years or a lot of years, right? That's less about process and more about some of the soft skills that we're talking about, right? Companies that get it right, when you talk about best practices, take their time to go through assessment of the organization and readiness beyond ban the box, and what does it truly mean in identifying what positions and job functions do we think can create a good pathway. This is what Henry's program has done, and correspondingly for partner organizations like CCT, we provide the individual with the skills to now navigate that space, right? It really is about thinking differently about second chance hiring as a staffing model. I can't say that enough. We aren't a database of candidates. There's more involved with the person that has justice involvement. And so the barrier buster in that way is the employer and the person who works in the employer to have the conversation around getting talent back to work in terms of what are those steps in the process. And every one of us up here is well suited, and my job developer, Paul Torres, is in the back, can help with that. So we encourage folks to take advantage of those resources from the ecosystem partners that do this work on the job applicant side.
All right, thank you. I think we're going to go to, how much more time? We got more? I want to make sure we are honoring our time and leaving time for Q&A. Okay. What I like to do, I know that's it's a hot time. One of my jobs was reining this group in. I know. I want to leave. I know. I'm trying because I got caught listening and not really stopping individuals. What I want to leave with the question now for all the panelists is, what is your why? Why is this work important to you? And because you've already sold, I see. Raise your hand if you're HR again. I think there's some people you're going to be able to reach out to and connect with. But what is your why? I'd like each panel to have a moment to just share what is your why as it relates to this work.
My why is simple. It's me. I mean, I am the individual that I serve. I understand what lack of opportunity does to an individual's self-esteem, what it does to their family, children, the legacy that an individual will leave. So very simply put, I wanted an opportunity and a chance, and I had to prepare myself. So I think that the best way to enrich our community and to keep our neighborhood safe is to give that same experience to somebody else.
I would say for me, coming into this work from HR, I now see myself as the embodiment of transferable skills. And I like to anchor myself to a quote by Gwendolyn Brooks that says, "We are each other's harvest and we are each other's bond." And it is my responsibility, and I don't take it for granted any day that I do this work, that 2.5 decades working in corporate HR is a gift that I need to give to the second chance space. And so I do that unapologetically.
I think for me, there's lots of reasons. I've worked in criminal justice for going on like 26 years now, and I've worked in the system in lots of different spaces and different roles. And like I mentioned earlier, I think when we're looking at public safety and the reasons why people engage in criminal activity, I think one of the things that I've have learned over the years is that for a lot of people who end up justice involved, they end up justice involved because engaging in crime was the most rational choice they had. Now that's not true for everybody. I mean, there's, but when you kind of get into like the core of like the vast majority who walk through your door, I mean, that is it. I mean, it's a lot of times it's tied to circumstance. And a lot of times that is due to the fact that there simply weren't opportunities and things that are just as simple as being able to get a job. And that makes absolutely no sense to me. It's things like, there's a lot of people, to access like behavioral health care. The first time they've ever been able to do that is when they had contact with the justice system. That also makes absolutely no sense to me. And so, for me, I think, again, I mean, I think it just boils down to, I mean, everybody should have a chance. And I think, and for those things that are just basic, you should have a chance to have a job. You should have an opportunity to live in a safe home. Just those things that a lot of folks take for granted. And this right here just really kind of has positioned us all to be able to offer, those opportunities and chances to people. And again, we as a community and as just, people in general, we reap the benefits of that. So.
Yeah, so City Startup Labs really was formed to develop entrepreneurial talent and capacity among millennials, African American millennials, and then we, in part with the help of Patrice, segued into working with this population of justice-impacted folks, really bringing the kind of work that we were doing with millennials to this population. But at the end of the day, really, we're in the people potential business, right? We want to make sure that whether or not you're developing your entrepreneurial talent so that you can launch a business or be able to apply that talent to be a more value-added employee, right? It's at the end of the day, it's about how do we get folk to be in a position to address not only their own personal aspirations, right? But as a community, we're challenged with socioeconomic mobility issues right here in Charlotte. And frankly, we believe that this population of returning citizens can be catalytic, both in terms of addressing those at a personal and familial level and community level, but also we feel that they can be important and catalytic in terms of economic activity that goes on in these communities. And so we're really, across the spectrum of the work that we do, it's really about personal or human potential. And so that's what drives us. And I'll turn it over to Eric because he's got that look.
I got the look. All right, I had to. I know we could be here forever. I wanted to open up to questions. I know you had a question immediately. Yes.
So first of all, we're not getting recorded, are we?
Yes. Yes, we are. So that might be a question. Offline question. Thank you.
No, I will rephrase my question. I'm a talent acquisition professional. The energy sector has significant investments over the next 15, 20 years. It is rumored that our local utility is going to invest $70 billion in the grid over the next 5 years. They don't have enough people to get that. So to speak to your point, there's a new need to think differently, and I appreciate that. The challenges that they have is they don't understand how to solve some of the tactical issues. All the things you guys talked about, we can get our heads around. The issues are, how do we find the people that have a driver's license? How can we motivate them to go to where the jobs are as opposed to back to the neighborhood? These positions, line workers, are going to start out high school diploma and one class at CPCC, $67,000 with good benefits. And in 6 years, they'll be making six figures. That's just how it is. So these are real opportunities, and with individuals that are inspired to deal with the internal issues. Now, guess what? Some of the justice-involved folks, depending upon the offense, never going to get a job in a nuclear facility, just not. So they need to be able to track internally within Workday, because once you're inside, it's difficult to figure out who's who. So all of those things are floating around as internal barriers that an individual can say, all right, I'll go figure that part out. But there's a whole lot of infrastructure. So when you're on the job and you're dealing with someone that isn't used to dealing with other kind of people, they may say the wrong thing. And I grew up in DC, you're trained to respond a certain way. Can't do that. You all get that taken care of. But I need to make sure that we have a tactical implementation of individuals showing up with a driver's license, decent credit, and the training and the opportunities are there. So it was not for the answer, not for you to answer here because it's too much, but I want to say it because I know there's a lot of people in the room that can help out. How you doing?
So I'll comment on that because before I became a senior manager with the county, I was actually with Center for Community Transitions for 16 years. And a lot of times when I meet with employers, I say, look at individuals that are tied to organizations that can help with driver's license. So the key there is reach out to your local nonprofits that have the population that can assist with driver's license, can assist with this, because they, with not a staffing agency approach, more importantly, a talent, untapped talent approach.
If I could comment and stuff a little bit on that too, because one of the things at CJS through our reentry, what we do is we have direct contact with the prison systems. So we know who's getting out and when they're getting out. And, I have staff that go into those prisons and make contact with those folks if we know they're coming back to Mecklenburg County. And part of what we do is we're also talking to them about, okay, what's your plan? What, have you taken any advantage of any kind of like the training or educational opportunities while you've been inside? What is it you're wanting to do while you're, when you come out? We also talk to them about, the resources and things that are available. We work with them to make sure when they come out, they've got identification. Now, it might not be a driver's license, but it'll be a state ID, so, to get those things in place. But, again, one of the things that we also do for the folks that come through and, and are part of our reentry service programming is they have, case managers that are assigned to them. And so those individuals are working with those folks at every step of the way. So when they're, working, when they're getting into the workforce, that case manager is available there to them. That case manager can also connect with that employer to let them know, like, hey, they're attached to our organization. We're working with them. If there is an issue with this person on the job, we tell them, like, look, don't be so quick to just, to let them go. Because again, there's things, we're learning, but we have, folks there that are able to kind of serve as that sort of intervener and work with that employer to help, again, that person be successful. So, there are places where, yes, you can attach. And if there is a specific skill set and, that you're looking for, there are the opportunities to build folks up, to prepare them to move into those roles.
We got time for 2 quick questions and 2 quick answers.
Yeah.
We hurry.
Look,
I'm sorry.
the facilitator took it. He told me that.
So we have a question here, and then another question over here.
More so a statement. Based on the panel here, the topics that have been discussed, from policy to practice, continuous peer support, collaborations, understanding of where to go, how to move, in what manner, if you would consider, of course, of the individuals that put together this summit, to possibly put together a summit that will be applied to the employers with the connection to the individuals on this panel, to have a sense of collaboration and understanding of how to be able to navigate and collaborate so that we can stop the issues from continuing to arise.
But my question, and it may lead to another summit, because you guys is workforce development, and I work in workforce development along with Eric. All the work that is done to help individuals with those barriers get employment, be able to provide for their families. I think the bigger issue, and I want to know, is leaders. Have you guys, or do you guys have an initiative or some type of fight? Because we know some of the reasons some of them re-engage in criminal activity is because of the pay. So I would say on a state level, are you guys possibly pushing for more pay? Because we know that is the biggest issue here in North Carolina. So that is part of the reason why some of these individuals have these issues.
I mean, I'll just, comment from the department, from Criminal Justice Services. With any employer that's looking to come, to connect with us and wants us to be able to refer people there for employment, we tell them out the gate, you've got to offer a living wage. So we advocate heavily for that. And so if we have companies or organizations that are coming and are, saying, well, we can pay minimum wage, we're like, well, we're not the place that, is going to send you folks. We're just real about that. So when they come in to connect with us, that's the first thing out the gate is they have to offer a living wage before we'll do any direct referral to them.
As you can see, we are holding up the process. Let's give our panelists a round of applause.
Round of applause. Thank you.
And by all means, there will be networking opportunity. Please stay engaged throughout the day. Get business cards. We have information on criminal justice services and Center for Community Transitions. So thank you for your time. We are on a break now.